for Network Rail, and Nick Hill, Contracts Manager for Amco Griffin, working on strengthening Yarm Viaduct. So careful underpinning about working Victorian Viaduct. So what about you guys?
Super, for me to go first, because you're doing most of it. So I'm Paul Wright, Network Rail Lead Portfolio Manager, as just said, working on the Eastern Route capital programmes, doing structures, renewals and strengthening works. We're here to discuss the strengthening works on the iconic structure that is Yarm Viaduct. Luckily, Nick's going to be doing a lot more talking than I am, because he was here today working on this wonderful structure. So Nick will introduce himself.
Yeah, Nick Hill, so Senior Contracts Manager for Amco Giffen. I've been involved in this project right from the start, from the design remit right the way through. So probably 4 years plus now, I would have said. So yeah, it's been a big part of what we've been doing for the last 4 years. So it belongs to Amco Giffen. Just with regard to the questions, I'm happy enough to take a few if there's anyone burning questions through the middle of it, or if you'd rather wait till the end.
If you're happy with that, if there's a burning question, then that's fine. Yeah,
I've got no problem with that at all.
Okay.
So as you can see here, Yarm Viaduct, I'm sure most, if not all of you, will be familiar with the structure itself. Straight through the middle of Yarm, but you'll be surprised how many people drive through Yarm and don't even know it's there, because as you drive through Yarm, you can't even see it. So we're a big part of it anyway. So should I get this thing to work? Yeah, it was working before. Give me a second.
Press anything, you know.
It's just this. Thank you.
Going on, yeah.
Okay, so as far as we're concerned with regard to people involved, we've got ourselves, obviously Network Rail and ourselves as principal contractor. Designer, we've had ACON, again another local company from Newcastle, and Roger Bullivants, who've been our main piling subcontractor. You'll see a bit more of them as we go through. Location, as I said, straight through the middle of Yarm there. Various obstacles and various things in the way, again, which I'll come to in a minute. You can see there, it's a very tightly restricted location. We were working, I'll come to the details of where we're working in a minute, but we were working primarily from the river through the town, from the river itself. So we did 14 of the spans doing underpinning. There's already been a number of underpinning works done throughout the structure. At the other end, about 25 years ago, it was all done by another contractor. So they underpinned a number of the piers due to subsidence of the track, of the viaduct itself. I mean, some areas of the viaduct have actually gone down by between 50 and 100 mil, maybe even more in places. When you're actually there, you'll actually see it does move a bit. So you can imagine there's been quite a lot of track settlement over the years, hence the reason why we've ended up having to do this underpinning this time around. So yeah, for those who, with regard to the history of it, we've got 1849. Again, a lot of the stuff, we learned a lot about it whilst we were doing this project, because we weren't aware of when we started how old and how iconic this structure is. So yeah, over 170 years old, built over a 3 or 4 year period with an alleged cost of £44,000, which obviously in those days was a lot of money. So as late as 1966, it became Grade 2 listed. You can see the plaque there, that's over the river span. Again, that's what we cleaned that up as part of the works while we were there through last year. And obviously you can see an older photo we've got up there from back in the day when it was in use as well. So as you can see from the centre photo there, you can see where parapet, the string course there, is actually settled quite significantly. Again, that is an older photo, but you can obviously see how much of a repair was needed. So in the past, well, you'll also see there on the Arch 37 and Arch 35, you'll see where there's actually been brick underpinning that was carried out probably about 50 or 60 years ago, was carried out, but unfortunately in some it's caused other issues, unfortunately, because it's caused settlement within the arches either side of that, it's caused other issues, but ultimately that was needed at the time to for issues, as you can see there in the other photo. So major defects we've got is the existing foundations, big settlement issues in certain areas, open fractures, as you can see there, primarily within those new brick ribs. That's where most of the fractures were actually occurring. There's a few on the main viaduct, but a lot of them within that, so they've all been repaired. Various longitudinal fractures along the arch barrels. Again, significant displacement to the bulging parapets. There's a few repairs have been done that way. There's a lot of pattress plates going all the way through the viaduct in some places, just literally to clamp it and hold it together as well. And then that was the major defects that we needed to stop them getting any worse at this stage. So other minor defects we've actually been looking at as well. There's water seepage through the arch barrel, so there's voids on top of each of the piers. There's spandrel voids, so we've actually had a look at those as well. So there, we've not done any work to those, but there are some. There's a void above each one of those. We've actually gone down and investigated inside there, so they may need filling in sometime in the future. At the moment, they're still okay as they stand at the moment, but drainage wise, we've actually had to rod out the drainage through each of the piers where we were working, actually rod out the drainage to allow the water to get out and escape from those locations, because some of them had a lot of water in them as well. So there's new downpipes and various things we've had to install to make sure the water gets away from the viaduct. Okay, and there's the last on there, minor vegetation. There's been a history of vegetation of various bits of plant growth growing out of the viaduct at various locations, which, as we know, in terms of the brickwork, can cause some fairly significant problems. So there's a decent amount of vegetation to be cleared off the alongside that. So general constraints and everything that we had within the works we were working in. So we've got span 13, which is High Church Wind, which is where we really had the biggest constraints. That's where we had overhead lines. You've got very, very close proximity of buildings, and that's ultimately where the design we ended up with came from, and the ability to work around in the middle of Yarm, and actually you'd have to insert 650 piles within that locality without disturbing people through them, which we managed to achieve, and everyone's been happy with. Ultimately, it took a bit of work to do so. So initially we were looking at section 61 noise restrictions and everything being in place, but through discussions with the council, the discussions with subcontractors, we were able to find a piling methodology which allowed us to effectively almost silently install all of these piles in fairly quick time. So as you'll see, there's various areas that we were actually working. We worked on spans 12 to 24, and then from 36 and 37, which were up near the river. The ones between those 2 points had already been done previously. Anything further south of that, i.e. spans 1 to 11, the settlement there is minimal. It's just down to the change of the level of the rock and the makeup of the ground and everything in that area. It's further away from the river, and therefore there's not been any significant settlement, hence the reason why there's no need for any underpinning there. So that's the span 13 I was just mentioning there. You can see the proximity. This building right here is allegedly, I'll say allegedly, it's thought to be, it says probably on the plaque, to be fair. It's probably the oldest dwelling in Yarm. And that's around about, I think, 400 years or so old. You'll see right at the end, I've got a bit of, we actually ended up in that arch just behind there, we actually ended up digging out some of the old foundations for the of the building that were destroyed dismantled because of the when they built that pier. There was actually the building was bigger, so they actually demolished half of it, and that's what's left. But there's still people living in there, and it's we had to do a survey the inside of the actual house to make sure before and after our works, just to make sure there was no further cracks or anything in the. To be fair, we had quite a few cracks there in the first place, so it's probably just as well we did survey it. But okay, already mentioned. So we've got these brick arches, the ribs that were put into there a number of years ago that they've done the job they needed to at the time. that's for sure. But it did complicate our work somewhat because we had to then, certainly around this area here, the two piers that we had to unpin were those two. So we had to work in and around those ribs, which made it even more interesting in terms of being able to pile around them as well. So the reason why they're differentiated, we've got type A standards, type A underpinning the standard type, which was the nice, we'll call it the easy one because it was a lot simpler. And the piers 36 and 37, we've got the type B and type C, which were the modified ones due to the constraints of working around the end of the viaduct, around the ribs. So the design concept itself is just a passive underpinning system. So ultimately, the intention is you've got needle beams going through the pier itself. We'll go through details on how we managed to achieve that shortly, but we've got needle beams going through there, and then you've got the piles come down here along with several pile caps and diaphragms there. So ultimately, the load from above goes through these beams, through this concrete, and then down into the piles. The piles then are based down onto rock. So they've been designed to take up to 100 ton load per pile. They've all been, they've all been tested up to 75 tons, and a number of them on each pier have actually been gone up to the full 100-ton testing. But ultimately, because we ended up at rock, they were pretty much all tested up to 100 in reality. But the general design concept, because of the existing piles for the piers are timber. And we found proof of that once we were actually doing the excavation itself alongside the piers. In order to, because not shown on here is the actual ground level. The intended ground level was up about here somewhere. You're talking about the underside of this pile cap here, theoretically being about 1.5 meters below existing ground level, as it is now. So we had excavation to do for that. But as we were excavating, you'll see there's very little detail of the corbel. The corbel detail there, that was actually higher than anticipated. And what we actually found was there was parts of the old timber raft that was actually protruding out from the corbels as well. So there's that, and then obviously there's all the piles, timber piles down to the rock as well, just beneath that. So it was quite impressive to see how good a condition the timber was in, to be honest with you. It wasn't flaking away or anything like that. It was because it's been down under the ground for so long and protected, it was in decent condition, but obviously it is failing because obviously it's going down, but certainly it's lasted 175 years to where we are now. And it's, if they only go down a very small amount comparatively, it's done a very good job over the time. So I mentioned the type B and C modifications. These were a right pain. I'll be honest with you, especially the type C, because I'll go through that in a minute with you. But basically, in order to do this, we had a very different design. So there was sort of having two pile caps, like on one side, it was like on 3 different levels, and we had beams going through the ribs themselves as well. So we incorporated the ribs into the design as well. So all the load was still transferred through down into the piles. So you can see the transverse rib. We had long beams going all the way through. So as you can see, there was it was a bit more complex. One thing we have to be very, very careful of is obviously not drilling too many holes in the viaduct itself at the same time. So primarily it was along the lines of we could drill one at one end and the next one had to be as far away as possible and so on. So we could have 2 holes open at any one time, but try and keep them as far apart as possible. I'll give you a few photos in a minute to say how we managed to achieve that. So the big part of the way we ended up doing this project was the jacking methodology. This jacking methodology hasn't been used very much, as far as I'm aware. I think this is the first time it's been used in 25, 30 years. It was last used on a very small area of this viaduct, which is where we got the initial idea from when it was done all those years ago. Most of the work they did was done using conventional piling, but one very small area was done using this method. And we contacted the contractor who is the only ones who have these rigs still in existence. And we actually got a couple of new ones made up especially for this project to do the jack piling. So, but yeah, ultimately it is apart from the power pack that powers the rams here, it is a completely silent way of doing piling. So we simply got we basically had to make sure that we got all the pile cap and everything in place first, and then built these steel frames, and then bolted the rig down onto the steel frames, so that we did it a different way around. So normally you would actually do the piling first, get the foundations in, and then building up everything up above that. What we had to do this time was we had to get the beams through, because the piling rig and this beam here are actually attached to those beams going through the pier, and that's what they used to use the jacking force to actually push them down into the ground. So ultimately the piling was the last operation we did instead of being the first, which is so, but it worked exactly how we wanted it to. So you'll see in the photos, you'll see some of the basic. We use polystyrene to create the form the holes within the concrete in the pile caps and diaphragms to enable us to just pile straight through from above, and then just top them up with grout and concrete. There was a sort of conical shape within each of the within the pile cap itself to ensure that any pressure that's coming up, to make sure that that the pile doesn't actually plunge through any of the concrete at all. So yeah, it took a bit of persuading certain people to get round to our way of thinking, but ultimately piling last was the right way to do it. I won't go into too much detail on this one, but as you can imagine, there was a hell of a lot of reinforcement within these pile caps and diaphragms. A lot of that down to the fact that we had the large loads going through it. But in reality, one positive out of it was the way that we had normally through design, you'll find there's been a lot of changes that come up when the steel fixers get hold of it. They'll have a few comments. On this occasion, through the design reviews and obviously then through the use of the BIM modeling, very few comments on the reinforcement. Everything went very well in terms of being able to install the reinforcement as planned. You can see how we had to, in some places, we actually had to have the reinforcement going through the beams that are in there and everything. So it was certainly one of the more complex ones we've had to do. So just through a few slides of a few photos to show you how we got things done. You'll see that this is the pile cap, the first pour after the excavation. You'll see that the first pile cap is actually separated from the pier itself, but you can see that the polystyrene void formers in there ready, and then obviously there you see the polystyrene still in, but the pile cap formed in there ready to be ready for a bit of waterproofing on the underside of that. Then got the next stage. We can see the pile cap still there, now buried. We've got the wire sawing kit. Again, they don't get to use those too often, but we've got a contractor who goes and does that. And then they simply, I say simply, it wasn't as simple as that. Simply, we just cored 4 holes, one in each corner, and then fed the wire through, and we're able to cut the 2 sides, and top and bottom, to therefore create a block, hopefully, something akin to that, which was then basically we had a bar in the middle of, there's the 4 holes, there's a bar, and we put a bar through and literally just pull the bar through it, and then use an excavator to just slide that out. So as soon as it was cut, just grab hold of it, just pulled it out, and it slid out. Hence the reason why we say we had these. As you can see in the middle, it's all very good, clean cut, and you can see just to make up the pier itself, you've got a brick centre there, but ultimately a lot of the base there is all stone. And the stone itself was managed to be packaged up, reused locally, some of it used within the local environment around the viaduct for various reasons that the locals wanted. Others gone away for reuse elsewhere. And then, as you can see there on the right, we've got the beams installed, as I said, 2 at a time, and then the void, slide the beam in, and then shuttered at each end, and then concrete poured between in where the viaduct is, concrete poured in there. And that concrete had to be set before we could then core the next 2 out, and so on. So there was 10 beams in each pier to go through. So overall, I think we had about 100 just over 140 of these beams to install. So next up, diaphragm, which is obviously the next one up. You can see the reinforcement around the beams itself, more polystyrene void formers along various things. But yeah, it's just more of the very similar sort of work. There was some fairly extensive shuttering. As you can imagine, that's over 1 meter tall. There was a fair bit of load going into the concrete that was needed to be held back with the temporary works to get that sorted. So that's the piling rig. It's certainly the smallest piling rig I've ever had to work with, but it was one thing we did have to do, was stipulated by the designers. We actually had to have two piling rigs, one on each side of the pier, doing the job at the same time. So they had to so that the load through the beam wasn't offset one side or the other. So they both had to pile down at the same time on each side of the pier. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but we'll give it a whirl. Rizzing.
The chances? No. No, unfortunately, it's one of those ones. It's not going to.
We can share the video at a later date if people want to see it in action.
Yeah, but I mean, basically that was a video produced by one of our suppliers, Roger Bullivant. It's actually on their website if anyone wants to look anyway from whatever. Ultimately, just showed the video of the piling in operation, which again just shows how simple it was to do and how well it worked. So on top of that, as you can see, there's a number of masonry repairs that we had to carry out. We did all this with our own teams within Amco Giffen. As you can imagine, working at height, working along the viaduct, it was certainly a challenge for us. But on sunny days like that, it was absolutely fine. There wasn't too many of those, man. But as you can see, some of the sort of standard detail repairs that we've done there, fairly simple repairs, but ultimately important to make sure that we maintain the integrity of the viaduct. So, all in all, basically we completed this successfully in February 25. It took us 18 months all in to get this to get everything done. There was so it's certainly been a longer project than we normally get through the framework itself to get it completed, but ultimately successfully completed. A lot of locals very happy with the fact that we managed to complete this without disrupting them too much. We've actually improved the area. The area where we are there and throughout the viaduct was heavily vegetated. Potential for people being in there who shouldn't be in there, messing around and whatever. We've actually the underside of that viaduct is now completely or fully stoned up. We've actually the local bridge inspectors have just recently been in there. They've had great access to go in there and inspect that bridge longer term and in general. So it's far better place to now than it was when we arrived as well. So it's certainly been a positive from that perspective.
Just on the interaction with the locals, we held a drop-in session prior to the works, which most of Yarm must have turned up for. We had about 50, 60 people on the night. It went down really, really well. The interaction with the council for securing the compound locations in their pay and display car parks in what is such a tight little town anyhow. There was good work there, as Nick says, the interface with the local residents that do rent and have property off Network Rail that we had to liaise with and talk to, potentially removing, demolishing and replacing. Overall, yes, there's been a few negatives, but we've had a lot more positives for the engagement, and it's definitely worth something that we'll take on to other schemes. Sorry about that, Nick. I just thought it was a really good positive.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we've been shortlisted for 2 NCA Bridge Awards, so there's been heading down to London next month, hopefully to pick up an award or 2. We'll see. But be nice to bring those back up. And the key from lessons learned from our point of view, I think I've already mentioned these, but the jack piling is something that's a very positive thing from our point of view, and obviously the RC detailing has been mentioned on there from a designer's perspective. A few other things. just a few more photos really. As you can see, this is the way it is. We've done more various other social value sort of stuff as well on site. See, well, obviously this is how it's going to look at the end, but all of this kind of thing, all the fencing that's been along here, we've actually renewed the full fencing for the local residents. The gates down the far end there, that's adjacent to a wellness centre within Yarm, so we've actually installed areas within the wellness centre itself. We've actually put concrete paths in there for the charity, done all of that, put new gates on throughout, and then are actually going to be using that for all of the projects they want to undertake there. So it's a massive area of three arches they're actually going to be utilising for their purposes as well. So it's, again, the whole area, the locals are very much happy about that kind of thing. Yeah, just a few more photos of how we ended up of those between the ribs and everything. It was very tight working space, and we even had a manhole to work around just down in the river as well there, making sure we didn't pile through that and cause any issues with flooding and water coming back up through into Yarm from that manhole. So we've had quite a number of constraints, and it's certainly been interesting. And last but not least is what I mentioned to you at the start about being around near Hope House, the oldest house. This is what we found. We actually had an archaeologist. Whenever we did any excavations, there were an archaeologist had to be on site right the way through. So it was there most of the time. And at various times we found, well, dogs, horses, various other animals, as you'd expect from over the last 400 years. But alongside that, that's what we found, the foundations of the building that came out the back of there. There was a well, there was a coal storage and various things, along with various artifacts that he's got there from pottery from years gone by, various other knives, and as you can imagine, quite a few bits and bobs that have been thrown off the viaduct over the years as well from the rail perspective. So there's a lot of certainly a lot of interest on that side of things. We had various, sent the school kids out and various things as well, which has been good to get an interest from the youngsters in the archaeology. So thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation.
Well, thanks very much for that, Nick and Paul. Really interesting. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take questions from the floor.
Apart from the fact you've seen the visual aspects of the interior, what else was actually giving you a clue that needed to be done? Did you get to the stage where I just went to Cognac to do something?
But the assessments that would have dictated it's surpassed its point of reliability, but something needs to be done, and obviously it was quite a major involvement that we had to.
There have been a number of track faults reported over time as well. That's the reason from the settlement of the structure. That with the structural assessment showing. One thing I obviously didn't end up mentioning there is up inside this rib up here. One thing I'd say is obviously those ribs are causing issues, but in reality, there's actually part of the arch is actually peeling away as well, and internally between those ribs as well. So there are still some major structural issues within the bridge itself. But yeah, ultimately the detailed examinations really drive what work we end up doing here. And this is seen as very much a long-term fix for the remainder of the viaduct. This effectively fixes any more settlement for any of the viaduct where they have concerns over longer term now.
And there are some decent weighted freight trains go over that viaduct, isn't there?
Yeah.
You can feel them and hear them. Yeah.
Yes. But when I say, just come back to your question earlier on about the stone on the river span, there's never any settlement on the river span, and we build out stone. So the brick one's the only one I think we're having a problem with. They're on the land.
Another one for me as well. Is there any benefits, lessons learned on your planning process for that? It's very, very complex the way you've done it. I assume there's been a lot of around the table prep. Is that anything could be shared with
You mean with the council?
Well, council, yourselves, and have you actually mapped out the work to actually build it to?
To be honest, this is bread and butter to AMCO and the interface with the councils really well on each project and assess what's the requirements, and if there's planning permission, listed building consents, all those boxes and documents that I have to prepare. Over the years, you build up a really good relationship with with the councils that you've worked with?
Our lives were made a lot easier by the relationship with the local residents. They could have been a lot more awkward than they were. But absolutely everyone was spot on. Again, it was one of those things, if we had to take down or disturb any of their area at all, we made sure that they were, we looked after them and made sure that, we helped them as much as they helped us. And the council, again, it's Stockton Council, been very good discussions, and we've talked to them and they've come out and seen us and they've just left us to it, because there's not been anyone complaining whatsoever.
I think the piling noise reduction was a really big saving of proving that we're trying to do the right thing by causing least amount of noise disturbance, just disturbance in general, integrating and liaising with the community.
It's a good point, the fact you get that relationship, 'cause, where social media is nowadays, focuses on the negatives, never seems to focus on the positives, is it?
Yeah, I think most social media interest we had was a guy who's on a Facebook group about bridges. He just kept posting about the work, and he was literally, his house was about 5 yards from that pier face that way. So he looked over his fence, and that was his view every day of the week. So he was happy.
At the back.
Was there a speed restriction on it because of the sort of issues with the rail?
No, there was no speed restriction on prior to. We did obviously discuss through the design phase whether we'd need to put a speed restriction on at all for any reason, because we were coring through the pier itself and all of that kind of thing. But no, all the calculations were done that everything was structurally sound and we didn't need to put any speed restriction on at
I
all.
was thinking more about previous to your work, the sort of.
No, it didn't. It didn't remove any speed restriction that was already in place. I think it was preempting that stage. Yeah.
What's the sort of expected lifespan now to have been bought for those piers after the works, before anyone further stepped in?
Yeah, I think it's a minimum. I think Dan's on the call, he might speak up, but I think it's a minimum 50 years that we give on this kind of thing.
I mean, is that your sort of design life, or what's the expected life?
It's expected to be far more than that, but the design life will be minimum 50 years.
Any problems with nature, like bats and that sort of thing?
I'm only joking.
We had a few, now there was a few birds we had to ask to leave or wait for the leaving, just because of various air vents that were needed sorting out from the standard voids. Bats, we did surveys and various things over the year or so before the structure got underway or the works underway. Again, no issues at all from that perspective. Little bit of, which one was it? Giant hogweed in the area. Again, dealt with that prior to arriving. Get rid of as well, but no, surprisingly, little from an ecological point of view.
Benefits of working in the city centre, eh? Or a town centre.
There is that, yeah.
I have a question, if that's all right. I assume, I'm asking, is there any post monitoring still ongoing, monitoring of the track and monitoring of the structure? Or I guess there may be some initial settlement or not?
The initial, obviously track monitoring, there's no change to the standard regime from the track perspective. There is ongoing monitoring in this span here because of the issue with the arch in general. There's some temporary works up there at the moment, but ultimately that's something that needs to be dealt with in the years to come. So, but other than that, the latest detailed examination has just happened. They've literally just done it. So it can't be in a better position than it is right now. But Noah Rail will know what the issues are with this viaduct as it stands right now.
Do we have any more questions on the floor?
Yeah, were there any other options considered other than the underpinning?
Well, I think the general remit was to stabilise the piers. So honestly, I can't remember any further alternative options. I think at the moment, unless we did talk about initially, instead of having the piles either side and going directly down, there was talk about trying to go in at an angle, trying to actually just core in through the piers themselves, trying not to have concrete lumps out here, trying to go through the piers themselves at an angle, but because of the timber piles being there, and obviously we would then upset the existing foundations. That was ruled out as an option.
There was a danger you're going to do more damage than good if you were putting through the piles. I think it was always going to be piles.
Weaken it to carry the work out.
It was what type of pile it was needed to be in reality.
Yeah. So
Will the track on top have to be, is it scheduled to be or at least be retapped?
I don't believe there's any major track issues at this point in time. So assuming it's all in good condition at the moment,
Because prior it said it was separate by
yeah, I think most of the settlement happened a number of years ago, hence the reason why they put the ribs in and various other things and underpinned where they did. So this was sort of a preemptive work to avoid any further issues moving forward.
Get the base right, and then it should start to be able to carry the stuff up top. Okay.
You can't sort the drainage issue.
Yeah, I mean, on the piers we sorted the drainage on the piers where we were working. You'll see this is all the drainage that we've done right the way through on each one. So each one of those, say, it's been rodded through into the spandrel void. The drainage now goes through those pipes and away from the viaduct itself. So whereas previously there was
So you can see some watermarks, can't you, on the stonework? It wasn't particularly great before.
I'm not going to claim that it's watertight apart from those drain holes. I'll be honest with you. It is dripping at a number of places. Otherwise, primarily, around the bourgeois stones on the edges in places as well. So it certainly isn't perfect by a long way, but it's certainly vastly more improved than it was previously.
Question from the front.
What was the total cost of the refurbishment? And was it all funded by Network Rail?
Yes.
We're talking about £8 million or
It's
so?
about £8 million.
£8 million totally funded by Network Rail. Stroke DFT. Stroke taxpayer.
I think that's good value.
It's the duration, the complexity, the amount of materials.
I mean, as you can imagine, there was a lot of labour went into this. It was slightly more expensive than the 44 grand to build it, but
Yeah. Things change over the years, Nick. I don't think we're ever going to get for 44 grand
there's
anymore.
a lot of people involved in putting this together.
You have a question, Bill?
But just whether those drainage pipes were plastic,
Yes.
because we had endless problems at Ribble Head. Not people like the fires and the bottom of the plastic pipes, so we had to make the bottom 20 foot metal again.
But this is Yarm though.
I didn't want to say that, but this is Yarm.
We'll go over to teams now, if that's all right. So
Question from Steve Scott. For all the exposed timber file caps in okay condition, I was some and rotten. Have you any photos to show, please?
I don't have any to show right now, but obviously if someone wants to get in touch afterwards, I'm happy to share photos we've got. Any more photos of anything in particular anyone wants, we've got a hell of a lot. So happy to share. In terms of the conditions of the timber, very good compared to what we thought it was going to be. Certainly from what we exposed, we only really exposed the raft of the timber, which was sat directly below the stone collar going around the pier. So we only saw the top of it, didn't want to go any further, and did the planning at that level. So it was, but yeah, certainly in reasonable condition.
The thought called Ben Brooks, like, tried to type a question, but it's not good.
Don't worry about that one. Just move on from that one.
I mean, you can speak. We can hear them through the speaker here if they want to talk. But
Oh, he's just sent a thank you, that's what we need.
One in the room.
Just
one.
a quick question.
Go on and one more.
Yeah, sorry. Did you have any contact with Heritage Societies, listed buildings?
It's grade 2 listed structure.
Grade 2, yeah.
So yes, we went through the process of the listed building consent along with the planning procedures. Yeah, and it went through absolutely fine. And it did help that they'd done something similar in 25 years ago. That's it.
It's all on Network Rail land as well, which does help. I think the heritage people funded the stonework, the cleaning up of the sign on the bridge.
You did, yes.
Yeah, so not totally funded by Network Rail, but which was a good thing, and it's a really good piece of work that's been done. It's come up really nicely.
Like those old terms, construction superintendent.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you know, some sort of giant piece, still a character in there. Any more questions?
Just one from me and that.
Yeah.
I always remember the track level, the parapet being quite low. Was any work done, to the parapet to raise it to a higher level? Or say a train crew stepped out of a locomotive? So was it done to walk across?
No, what you'll see is they've got the key clamp, they have altered the fencing rather than the stonework, as you'd expect, I suppose, over the years. Certainly I walked up there on the viaduct during the works there, and it certainly didn't feel unsafe anyway. So the handrails themselves are a reasonable height. I think they've even got allowance for some additional track lift at this point in time if need be. Although I suspect the structural engineers will try and resist that.
That ship was always a bit scary, pretty kind of little bit.
Yes.
Maybe not for ballast train or.
Same on the road for that bridge.
Yeah, well, the handrail and well going to bridge not really.
Yeah.
We used to be on top of a machine going across as well, so if you fell off that.
Yeah.
Right, I think we'll wrap the Q&A up there. So no more questions, then I'd like to ask Sean to give us a vote of thanks.
Just thank you very much, Basically, excellent presentation. That's good questions from that as well. Really appreciate it.
I'll next
Some of the things you've learned from that could be worthwhile actually share with the rest of the industry, especially how more in this space on how you're doing the prep side of it.
Yeah.
And how we actually planned and actually delivered. It's one of the things that we could actually learn from.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, our project delivery. I don't think we spend enough time actually doing the prep side. If you get in that level of detail, what you're getting into, you know, it makes it more cost effective delivery.
Yeah, I mean, in every job we've ever done, well, certainly I've ever done, is the more prep works, the more time you spend talking to the locals, to
Especially
everyone, all interested parties. It makes a massive difference in how the work progresses on the ground when you get.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for that, Sean. Our next meeting, right? Well, we've got this is our last meeting of this season. We've got our summer break, so our next meeting again will be hybrid, and it's titled Metro to Washington, being delivered by our M2W team, which Stephen is part of. That's on the 9th of September. And this time it's going to be in the LNER meeting room in Central Station in Newcastle. So changing venue. So thanks very much again, guys, and we'll close the meeting now. Thanks everybody.
Thank you, Nick.